Forget the shining knight and the golden chalice. What if the real quest for the Holy Grail was darker, older, and far more complex than any legend we know? Imagine a world lit only by fire and faith, where myth and history were one and the same. It is in that world our story begins. If you enjoy exploring history's greatest mysteries, a gentle tap on the like button helps our channel immensely. We love hearing from our community of night owls and history lovers, so feel free to leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, in Bedtime History, we join the real quest for the Holy Grail. Our journey doesn't begin in a grand cathedral or on a battlefield, but in the mists of a much older time, on an island shrouded in legend. These were the whispers from Avalon. Long before knights and crosses, there were other stories. They were stories of the Celtic people, carried on the wind and told around crackling fires. These tales did not speak of a cup, but of great, magical cauldrons. One such vessel was the cauldron of the Dagda, a powerful god. It was said this cauldron never ran empty, providing endless sustenance for any who came to it. It held an even greater power. It could restore the dead to life. In other Welsh tales, collected in a volume we now call the Mabinogion, there were similar treasures. There was the cauldron of Bran the Blessed, another vessel with the power over life and death. These were not objects of gentle piety. They were symbols of nature's raw power, of abundance, rebirth, and the unending cycle of existence. They were the pagan soul of a land that would later be called Britain. And at the heart of this land, a place of particular power, was a strange and wonderful hill, a place we now call Glastonbury Tor. Even today, you can feel it. A cool, damp mist clings to its slopes, as if the hill itself is breathing. The wind whispers through the ancient grasses and the crumbled ruins of a later age. This was a sacred site long before the first Christian missionaries arrived. There is evidence of human activity here, stretching back to the Iron Age and even the Neolithic period. It was always a place of mystery. It was into this world of ancient magic that a new story was woven, a Christian story. Legend says that around the year 63, a man named Joseph of Arimathea landed on these shores. He was the disciple who had offered his own tomb for Christ's body. He did not come empty-handed. He carried 2 small cruets containing the sacred blood and sweat of his crucified Lord. He journeyed to this mystical hill, to Glastonbury, and there, at its very foot, he was said to have buried the very cup used at the Last Supper. From the spot where the cup was buried, a spring emerged. Its waters ran red. The reddish tint comes from the rich iron deposits in the soil. But for believers, the color was a sign. It was the blood of Christ eternally flowing. To this day, you can see the site of the reddish, iron-rich water of the Chalice Wellspring, a place of pilgrimage and peace. The legend grew even deeper. Joseph, weary from his travels, was said to have planted his staff in the ground. It took root, sprouting into a hawthorn tree, a unique tree, the Glastonbury thorn, which miraculously flowers twice a year, once in spring and again at Christmas. This place, Glastonbury, soon became identified with something even more legendary: the mythical Isle of Avalon. The name itself, Avalon, may mean Isle of Apples, a symbol of paradise in ancient Celtic lore. It was here, the stories claimed, that King Arthur was taken after his final battle to be healed of his grievous wounds. It was his final resting place. For centuries, this was only a story. But then, in the year 1191, the monks of Glastonbury Abbey made a stunning announcement. They had found it, the tomb of King Arthur and his queen, Guinevere. It was, most historians agree, a very convenient discovery. A likely publicity stunt to raise funds for their abbey, which had recently suffered a fire. But it worked. Pilgrims flocked to the site, eager to feel the presence of the once and future king, and to smell the wet earth and old stone of the abbey. These tales, pagan and Christian, blended together. They seeped into the soil of Britain, creating the perfect foundation for the Grail legend to be born. These whispered tales and local legends were just that, until a French poet took hold of them and forged them into the greatest adventure story of the Middle Ages. The story enters a new chapter. It moves from the misty hills into the candlelit rooms of a noble court. Here, we can almost hear the faint sound of a quill scratching on parchment. We can see the rich glow of illuminated manuscripts, their pages decorated with gold leaf and vibrant colors. It was in this world that a man named Detreaux worked. He was a poet at the court of the powerful Marie de Champagne in the late 12th century. He was a master of the romance, a new kind of story for a new age of chivalry. Between the years 1181 and 1191, he was working on his final masterpiece, a story called Percival le Conte du Graal. Percival, the story of the Grail. This was it. This was the first time the word Grail was ever written down in connection with this legend. But a Grail was not yet the holy chalice. The word simply meant a wide, deep dish or a platter, a common serving vessel. In his hands, it became something more. In the story, the young and foolish knight, Percival, finds his way to a mysterious castle. There, he witnesses a strange procession, a bleeding lance, candelabras, and then a maiden carrying a beautiful, glowing Grail. The vessel is not described as holding Christ's blood. It contains a single mass wafer, which miraculously sustains the castle's wounded lord, the Fisher King. Percival, having been taught it is rude to ask too many questions, stays silent. He watches the procession pass and says nothing. This is his great failure. He fails to ask the crucial question: whom does the Grail serve? Because of his silence, the Fisher King is not healed, and the kingdom remains a wasteland. The poem introduces the key characters that would define the legend for all time. The innocent hero, Percival, the wounded Fisher King. The mysterious Grail castle itself claimed he was not inventing the story from scratch. He said he was working from a source book given to him by his patron, Philip, Count of Flanders. But this book has never been found. It may have been a real text, or perhaps a clever way for the poet to give his tale an air of ancient authority. We will never know for sure. Tragically, Detreaux died before he could finish the poem. His story ends abruptly, leaving Percival wandering in the wilderness, and the mystery of the Grail completely unsolved. This unfinished ending was a stroke of literary genius, even if accidental. It created a void, a question that demanded an answer. Soon, other authors rushed to write their own continuations, each adding new layers, new characters, and new meanings to the quest. Had effectively invented the Grail quest as a chivalric trope. He established the central theme. The Grail is not something you simply find. It is something that must be earned through spiritual purity, compassion, and the wisdom to ask the right questions. The weight of his heavy, leather-bound book had changed the course of mythology forever. De Troyes lit the spark, but other writers would soon fan the flames, adding new, more dangerous, and more esoteric layers to the legend, tying it to the most powerful military order of the age. The legend now takes a harder, more martial turn. It becomes entangled with an order of men who were both monks and soldiers, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. We know them as the Knights Templar. We can picture them clearly, the sun glinting off their white mantles, emblazoned with a simple, stark red cross. We can hear the sound of armored knights marching in unison, a sound of discipline and unwavering faith. The order was founded around the year 1119 by a French knight named Hugues de Payens. Their original mission was a humble and noble one, to protect Christian pilgrims traveling on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. They were given headquarters on a piece of ground holy to three faiths, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very site of the ancient Temple of Solomon. This location alone sparked centuries of speculation. What did they find in the ruins beneath the temple? What secrets did they unearth? From these humble beginnings, the order grew into a massive international organization. They became incredibly wealthy and powerful. They were renowned for their military prowess during the Crusades, feared by their enemies and respected by their allies. More than just soldiers, they developed an early form of international banking, becoming trusted guardians of wealth, land, and secrets. They were the perfect candidates for a new role, guardians of the Grail. Another French poet, Robert de Boron, picked up where had left off, but he took the story in a new, explicitly Christian direction. In his work, the Grail was no longer a mysterious platter. It was identified for the first time as the very cup of the Last Supper, the same cup Joseph of Arimathea used to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. De Boron's story established Joseph as the first Grail keeper. He wrote that Joseph's descendants were charged with guarding the holy relic through the generations. This narrative of a secret lineage of guardians fit perfectly with the image of the Templars, a secretive, elite, and holy order of knights. Who better to protect Christendom's most sacred object? Of course, in all the thousands of official Templar documents that survive today, there is not a single mention of the Holy Grail, not one. But this total lack of evidence only fueled the speculation. It became part of the mystery. The silence was proof of how well they kept their secret. The legend grew, and in the popular imagination, the Templars became the Grail's eternal protectors. While some linked the Grail to these holy warriors, another poet, a German knight, claimed a different source entirely, one that pointed not to a cup, but to a stone from heaven and a secret lineage of keepers in a remote castle. Now our story travels to the heart of the German lands, to a Bavarian knight named Wolfram von Eschenbach. He wrote his epic poem, Parsifal, in the early 1200s, and he began with a bold claim. He said that de Troyes had gotten the story wrong. Wolfram insisted his own source was far more reliable, a mysterious and likely fictional scholar from Provence, whom he called Kiwat. With this, Wolfram set out to tell the true story of the Grail. In his version, the Grail is not a cup at all. It is a sacred stone. He calls it the Lapsit Exilis, a mysterious name whose meaning is still debated. It might mean stone from heaven, or perhaps stone of the exile. This stone was a thing of immense power. It could provide eternal youth to those who looked upon it. It could produce any food or drink a person desired. It was brought to earth, Wolfram wrote, by a band of neutral angels. those who did not take sides in the war between God and Lucifer. The guardians of this stone are a holy order of knights. Wolfram calls them the Templars, a clear and direct reference to the Knights Templar. They live in a remote and hidden castle, a place called Monsalvayashi, the Mountain of Salvation. Here, these knights protect the sacred stone, awaiting the arrival of the chosen one who will become the new Grail King. Wolfram's story is far more complex than the French romances. His hero, Parsifal, endures a long journey filled with psychological doubt and spiritual crisis. It is a profound story about lineage, faith, and divine grace. Wolfram's tale is also filled with strange and exotic details. He includes knowledge of the stars, of medicine, and of Eastern philosophies. The scent of exotic spices seems to drift through the halls of the Grail Castle. The sound of a lone flute plays a haunting melody in a vast hall. This suggests that Wolfram was drawing from a much wider pool of influences, perhaps from stories carried back from the Crusades. His vision of the Grail as a mystical object of immense power, guarded by a secret order of knights, would echo for centuries. It would heavily influence later secret societies and esoteric Grail hunters who felt a deep sense of awe and humility before this powerful object. With these foundational myths and literary epics established, the stage was set. The Grail was no longer just a story. For powerful groups across Europe, it was becoming a very real objective. The quest was about to leave the pages of romance and enter the bloody battlefields of history. The line between myth and reality was beginning to blur. What part of the early legend do you find most fascinating? The mystical hills of Avalon, or the coded verses of the poets? Let me know in the comments below. In the last chapter, we saw how a legend was born, forged in the mists of Celtic Britain, and hammered into shape in the courts of medieval France. But stories, no matter how powerful, eventually seek to become real. They seek a home in the physical world, and as the 13th century dawned, the quest for the Holy Grail was about to leave the pages of poetry and enter a brutal new chapter. A shadow race was beginning, fought not by questing knights in shining armor, but by real armies, in a war for the very soul of Christendom. Our story now takes us south, to a land of breathtaking beauty and dangerous ideas. The Languedoc, a region of what is now southern France, but which was then a world unto itself. Imagine a sun-drenched landscape, rolling hills covered in vineyards, and the fragrant wild herbs of the Garrigue. The air itself smells of thyme and lavender. Fortified towns and proud castles crown the hilltops, their stone walls glowing warmly in the afternoon light. This was a land of high culture, of tolerance, and of the troubadours, whose poetry celebrated love and beauty. It was a land that spoke its own language, Occitan, and it was a land that harbored a heresy. They called themselves simply the Bons Hommes, the good men, their enemies. The Catholic Church gave them another name, the Cathars. They flourished here in the 12th and 13th centuries, and their faith was a profound challenge to the order of the medieval world. Their core belief was a stark and uncompromising dualism. They taught that the universe was a battlefield between two opposing gods. There was a good God who had created the spiritual world, the world of light, of souls, of everything unseen and eternal. But the material world, the world we can see and touch, was the creation of an evil god, a lesser, malevolent deity they sometimes called Rex Mundi, the king of the world. This single belief changed everything. If the material world was evil, then the institution that dominated it, the Roman Catholic Church, was a corrupt fraud. The Cathars rejected its authority completely. Its sacraments were meaningless. Its priests were deluded. Its magnificent cathedrals, with their icons and golden relics, were nothing more than prisons of stone, temples to the evil god of matter. They met instead in simple, rough-hewn stone houses, their walls bare, their faith unadorned. Their spiritual leaders were known as the parfaits, or the perfects. These men and women were a striking sight, moving through the colorful courts of the Languedoc in their simple, stark black robes. They lived lives of extreme asceticism, attempting to detach themselves entirely from the corrupt material world. They were chaste, and they were strict vegetarians, believing that all animals which reproduce sexually were products of the evil creator. The only exception was fish, which they mistakenly believed reproduced asexually. For the ordinary believer, the goal was to prepare for the end of life. The Cathars believed in reincarnation. The soul, a spark of the good God's light, was trapped in a cycle of rebirth in the prison of the material body. The only escape was a single, sacred rite, a laying on of hands called the consolamentum. This was the one and only Cathar sacrament. If a believer received it before death, their soul would be freed and would return to the realm of light. If not, it would be reborn into another body to endure the suffering of the world once more. This was not some fringe cult. Catharism was deeply woven into the fabric of Languedoc society. The local nobles, powerful men like the Counts of Toulouse, tolerated and in many cases actively protected them. In the castle courtyards, you might hear the sound of spirited theological debates, a mix of the church's Latin and the local Occitan. It was a culture of inquiry, not of blind obedience. And for the Pope in Rome, Innocent III, this was an intolerable threat. It was a cancer growing in the heart of Christendom, and it had to be cut out. The Pope tried persuasion first. He sent preachers. They were ignored. He tried excommunication. It had little effect. The final straw came in the year 1208. A papal legate, a man named Pierre de Castelnau, was returning from a tense meeting with the Count of Toulouse. As he prepared to cross the Rhine River, he was assassinated by one of the Count's knights. For Pope Innocent, this was the pretext he had been waiting for. He declared the murder a martyrdom, and he called for a crusade. Not against the Muslims in the Holy Land, but against the Christians of the Languedoc. The Albigensian Crusade, named for the Cathar-friendly town of Albi, began in 1209. An army of northern French barons marched south, hungry for land and papal indulgences. This clash of faiths was never going to be resolved with words. As the armies of the north marched south, the Cathars and their treasures were forced to retreat to their most formidable strongholds, including one castle that would become synonymous with the Holy Grail. As the crusade tore through the Languedoc with fire and sword, the Cathar faith was driven from the cities and towns. The parfaits and their followers became fugitives, seeking refuge in the most remote and defensible places they could find. They fled to the mountains, to the jagged peaks of the Pyrenees, and there one fortress, above all others, became their final sanctuary, their last great symbol of defiance. A place called, imagine a pillar of rock, a pog as it is called locally, thrusting violently out of the earth. It stands over 1,200 meters high, its sides sheer and treacherous. Perched on its very summit are the ruins of a castle. This is even today, the biting wind whips around its high ramparts, a constant, lonely sound. Rebuilt around 1204 as a dedicated Cathar fortress, it became the last headquarters of the hunted church. It was a place of pilgrimage and a final refuge for hundreds of believers and their spiritual leaders. To the Crusaders, it was a nest of vipers, a fortress of heresy. For years, seemed impregnable. A tiny garrison could hold it against an army. But in May of 1243, the tide turned. A royal French army, some 10,000 strong, arrived at the foot of the mountain. They were determined to end the Cathar resistance once and for all. Inside the fortress, there were perhaps only a few hundred defenders, including soldiers, civilians, and over 200 parfaits. The great siege began. For almost a year, the defenders held out. It was a testament to the fortress's incredible natural defenses. The siege camp of the royal army spread out on the plain below, their campfires a sea of flickering lights in the darkness. The defenders watched from above, rationing their food and water, their resolve hardened by their faith. The air was filled with the terrifying sound of war, the groan of siege engines, and the sharp, cracking impact of trebuchet stones crashing against the castle walls. Day after day, week after week, the turning point came in the dead of winter. A small group of Basque mercenaries, soldiers skilled in mountain warfare, undertook a seemingly impossible task. Under the cover of a dark, moonless night, they began to scale the terrifying eastern cliff face of the mountain. It was a silent, desperate climb, a search for handholds on the icy rock. They succeeded. They surprised and overran a small watchtower, securing a foothold on the summit. From there, the Crusaders were able to haul a trebuchet up to the high ground and begin bombarding the inner fortress directly. The end was now inevitable. On March 2nd, the terms were harsh, but with a strange clause. The defenders were granted a 15-day truce, a 2-week armistice, before they had to make their final choice: renounce their faith or die. The mood during these 15 days must have been heavy with sorrow, but also with a desperate, determined purpose. And it was during this truce that the legend was born. The story insists that on the eve of the surrender, for Cathar parfaits escaped, they were lowered by rope down the sheer western cliff face, a terrifying descent into the darkness. With them, they carried the Cathar treasure. They vanished into the night and were never seen again. What was this treasure? So important that 4 men would risk their lives for it, while their brethren prepared to die. The records are silent. It could have been gold and silver to fund a future resistance. It could have been sacred books containing the secrets of their faith. Or, as the legends that grew over the centuries would claim, it could have been something else. A sacred relic of unimaginable power. The truce ended on March 16th. A huge pyre of wood had been constructed in a field at the foot of the mountain. Over 220 Cathars, men and women who had accepted the consolamentum during the truce and refused to abjure their faith, were marched down the mountain. They went willingly, without being tied, and threw themselves into the flames. The smell of smoke from that terrible fire hung over the valley for days, a final, tragic end to the last Cathar stronghold. The association between lost treasure and the Holy Grail would be popularized much later. In the 20th century, a German writer and mystic named Otto Rahn became obsessed with the story. He visited the ruins and argued passionately that was the real life, Munselweiche, the Grail castle, described by the poet Wolfram von Eschenbach. The idea of a sacred object, spirited away in the dead of night from a besieged mountain fortress, was too powerful to resist. The mystery of treasure has never been solved. But the Cathars were not the only powerful group in France to suffer a terrible fate. Just a few decades later, the shadow of persecution would fall upon the very knights who many believed were the Grail's true guardians. Just 63 years after the fires of went out, a new fire was being kindled. This time, the target was not a group of outcast heretics, but the most powerful, wealthy, and secretive organization in Europe, the Knights Templar. By the early 14th century, their power was immense. They were accountable only to the Pope. They were the bankers to kings and nobles. They commanded a vast network of castles, farms, and ships across the continent and in the Holy Land. They seemed untouchable, but they made a powerful enemy. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, was a man defined by two things: a cold, ruthless piety and a desperate need for money. He had borrowed heavily from the Templar order to finance his wars, and he had no way to repay the debt. He saw the Templars' immense wealth, their international network, and their secrecy as a direct threat to his own absolute power. And so he devised a plan of shocking audacity. A plan to destroy the order and seize its assets in a single decisive blow. He laid his trap with meticulous care. For months, secret orders were distributed to his royal officials in every corner of the kingdom. They were to be opened and acted upon simultaneously, all across France, on the same day. The day he chose was Friday, October 13th, 1307. The pre-dawn chill of that morning would become infamous. Before the sun had risen, the king's men struck. The sound of heavy doors being battered down and the shouts of soldiers echoed in Templar preceptories throughout the nation. Knights who had gone to sleep as the respected defenders of Christendom were dragged from their beds, arrested, and thrown into dungeons. The charges leveled against them were a grotesque fantasy designed to inspire public horror. The king accused them of heresy, of denying Christ and spitting on the cross during their secret initiation rites, of idolatry, sodomy, and blasphemy. These charges were almost certainly fabricated, but in the stone dungeons of the Paris Temple and other royal prisons, the truth did not matter. Under extreme and systematic torture administered by the king's inquisitors, many Templars confessed. They confessed to anything and everything, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed. Even the Grand Master, a proud old warrior named Jacques de Malle, confessed under duress. The king had his confessions, and he used them to pressure the Pope. Clement V, the Pope, a weak man who was effectively a puppet of the French king, eventually buckled. In 1312, he officially disbanded the order. Its property was to be transferred to their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller, but Philip ensured the French crown received the lion's share. He had won, but a central piece of his victory was missing. The prize he coveted most had vanished. The great treasure of the Knights Templar was gone. The king's men ransacked the Paris Temple, the order's main treasury, but the vast portable wealth of gold, silver, and jewels was not there. It had been moved in the days leading up to the arrests. Even more mysteriously, the entire Templar fleet, a formidable navy docked at the Atlantic port of La Rochelle, had disappeared. The docks, which should have been bustling with Templar ships, were empty. The air smelled of salt and tar, but the fleet was gone. Where did it go, and what was it carrying? This is the enduring mystery of the Templars. Speculation has raged for centuries. Did the fleet sail to Scotland, where the Templar order was still protected by Robert the Bruce? Did it go to Portugal, where the knights were cleared of all charges and simply changed their name to the Order of Christ? Or did it sail west, on a journey into the unknown. And what of the treasure? Was it merely gold, or was it something more? For those who believed the Templars were the guardians of the Grail, the answer was obvious. They had been tipped off, and they had moved their most sacred relic to safety. The final, tragic act of the drama took place in 1314. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was brought before a public scaffold in Paris, on an island in the Seine. There, he did something remarkable. He recanted his confession. He proclaimed his innocence and the innocence of the order, his voice ringing out for all to hear. The furious king ordered him executed immediately. As the flicker of the flames rose around him, legend says de Molay issued a curse, summoning both King Philip and Pope Clement to join him before God's judgment within a year. Both men were dead before the year was out. The king's betrayal was complete. He had destroyed the order, but its secrets, its treasure, and its legend had escaped him, with both Cathar and Templar secrets seemingly vanishing into thin air. The trail of the Grail leads away from the heart of France. For those escaping persecution, there was one clear path to safety: the formidable mountain range that stood as a gateway to Spain, the Pyrenees, a wall of jagged stone and ice separating France from the Iberian Peninsula. For centuries, this mountain range has been more than a border. It is a world of its own, a place of refuge, of secrets, and of passage. For the hunted Cathar and the fugitive Templar, these mountains offered the promise of escape. The journey was perilous. They would have traveled on foot or with mules, following ancient shepherds' tracks and smugglers' paths, moving through the sharp, cold air of the high mountain passes. Imagine a small group of refugees, exhausted and fearful, finally reaching a summit. Below them, a remote valley unfolds, the sound of goat bells echoing softly in the distance. They see a tiny, ancient stone village clinging to a mountainside, a sign of safety and civilization. The feeling of exhaustion would have been mixed with an immense sense of relief. The smell of pine needles and damp earth in the mountain forests was the smell of a new life, away from the king's inquisitors and the crusaders' sword. The terrain itself was their greatest ally. It was a landscape that was difficult to police, easy to hide in, and full of remote valleys, deep forests, and hidden caves. They were not fleeing into a totally alien land. The kingdom of Aragon, on the Spanish side of the mountains, had deep and long-standing cultural ties to the Languedoc. The nobles on both sides of the mountains were often related by marriage. Cathar sympathizers and refugees knew they would find a more tolerant reception here. Many of them settled in the foothills and towns of Aragon and Catalonia, blending into the local population. The Templars, too, had a clear destination. The order was incredibly powerful in Aragon. Their castles, known as commanderies, were formidable fortresses. At places like the Aragonese Templars initially resisted the royal orders for their arrest, holding out for months. It is entirely plausible that French Templars, perhaps carrying documents or portable treasures, found refuge with their brothers-in-arms on the Spanish side of the border. This region became a melting pot, a place where the esoteric beliefs of the Cathars could have mingled with the secret traditions of the Templars. It is a land steeped in legend. Remote monasteries, built into cliff faces like San Juan de la Pina, have their own ancient traditions of safeguarding holy relics. The local folklore in countless Pyrenees valleys is rich with stories of hidden treasures left behind by the Moors, the Cathars, or the Templars. It is a landscape that invites mystery. Centuries later, this very region would become a global center for Grail conspiracies. The tiny village of Rennes-le-Château, on the French side of the Pyrenees, became the subject of wild theories involving a hidden treasure connected to the Visigoths, the Merovingian kings, and the Holy Grail itself. The geography of the Pyrenees facilitated this transfer, not just of people, but of their secrets. It was the perfect conduit to move knowledge, relics, and legends from the furnace of France into the relative safety of Spain. This physical journey, this desperate flight south across the mountains, marks a crucial turning point in our quest. The hunt for the Grail is now leaving the realm of French poetry and persecution. It is moving onto Spanish soil, a land where the story of the Grail was not just a myth, but was about to become a verifiable and highly contested historical artifact. The journey across the Pyrenees was not just an escape. For many, it was a pilgrimage. They were heading towards a land where it was said the sacred cup had been kept safe for centuries, not as a legend, but as a documented historical fact. The quest has taken a dark and dangerous turn. If you were hiding a priceless relic, would you trust the remote fortress of Or, the secret network of the Knights Templar? Share your thoughts below. The flight across the Pyrenees was an escape. It was a desperate scramble for survival, but it was also a journey towards something. The fugitives from France, the scattered remnants of the Cathars and the Templars, were heading towards a land where the whispers of the Grail were not just a poet's dream or a heretic's hope. They were heading to Spain, where the trail of legend solidifies into a trail of ink and stone, where the shadow race for a mythical object ends and a scholarly investigation into a historical artifact begins. The quest now leads us out of the mountains and into the cool, quiet sanctuaries of the Spanish kingdoms, where two ancient chalices wait for us, each with its own incredible story. Our first destination is a sun-warmed city on the Mediterranean coast, Valencia. We step out of the bright Spanish sun and into the cool, cavernous interior of Valencia Cathedral. The air inside is still and heavy with the centuries. It smells of old incense and the faint, sweet scent of melting wax candles. Light struggles through high Gothic windows, illuminating a space designed to humble the individual and elevate the spirit. Here, the sound is one of hushed reverence, the soft shuffle of feet on stone floors, the distant murmur of a prayer, the whispers of pilgrims and tourists who have come from all over the world to see one thing. In a dedicated chapel, set apart and glowing softly under a focused light, it rests, the Santo, the holy chalice of Valencia. To look upon it is to immediately understand the challenge of the Grail legend. Your eyes are first drawn to the ornate gold stand, a masterpiece of medieval craftsmanship, studied with pearls and gems. This is the Grail of imagination, the Grail of romance. But your focus is then drawn upwards to the cup itself, and it is something else entirely. It is a simple, humble vessel, a small cup carved from a single piece of dark red agate, polished smooth by time. It has no gold, no jewels, no adornment at all. It is simply a cup, and that is the foundation of its profound claim. Their conclusion is that it dates from some time between the 4th century before Christ and the 1st century after. It was crafted in the Middle East, likely in a workshop in Egypt or Syria. In other words, it is the right age, and from the right part of the world, to have been a real drinking vessel that could have been present at a Passover Seder in Jerusalem in the year 33 AD. It aligns perfectly not with the legends of a magical chalice, but with the historical reality of a carpenter's supper. What is its story? How did it get here? The tradition, the sacred history passed down through generations, is as compelling as the object itself. The story holds that this was indeed the cup of the Last Supper. After the ascension of Christ, it was taken to Rome by St. Peter, the first pope. Then came the age of persecution. In the 3rd century, the Roman Emperor Valerian began a brutal crackdown on the Christian faith. The pope at the time, Sixtus II, was arrested and knew he would be martyred. He entrusted the church's most precious treasures to his deacon, a man named Lawrence. Lawrence was ordered to distribute the church's money to the poor and to send its most sacred relics to safety. He saved the cup, but not himself. Lawrence was famously martyred by being roasted alive on a gridiron. For centuries, the cup remained in Spain, hidden and protected through the turbulent years of the Visigothic kingdom and the Muslim conquest. And then, its history steps out of tradition and into documented fact. Pyrenea region we explored earlier. It was kept there for centuries, a sacred secret of the monks and the kings of Aragon. Finally, in the year 1437, it was formally moved from the mountains by King Alfonso V of Aragon and given for safekeeping to the great cathedral in his capital city, Valencia. It has remained here ever since. This journey is remarkable. Its trajectory almost perfectly matches the path of the Grail, as described in the medieval romances. It is a history that bridges the gap between the Holy Land of the Bible and the Grail castles of Arthurian legend. In modern times, its credibility has only grown. In 1982, Pope John Paul II visited Valencia. During the Mass he celebrated, he used this very chalice. In 2006, Pope Benedict XVI did the same. This is an act of profound significance. The case for the Valencia chalice is strong, with a paper trail that leads right back to the Pyrenees monasteries where the Grail was said to be hidden. But it is not the only ancient chalice in Spain with a powerful claim to the title. It is known as the Chalice of Dona Urraca, and to see it is to be dazzled. Where the Valencia cup was humble and stark, this object is a riot of gold and jewels. 2 ancient carved agate bowls are joined together, one forming the cup, the other the base. They are encased in a stunning setting of 11th century goldwork, encrusted with gems, pearls, and antique cameos. It was not, until very recently, considered to be the Holy Grail. The story of its transformation begins not in a cool Spanish basilica, but in the dry heat and dust of Cairo. It begins in the hushed atmosphere of a university library. The faint, sweet smell of old paper from ancient scrolls hangs in the air. They found 2 ancient parchment scrolls, written in Arabic. They were not expecting what they found. The scrolls told a forgotten story. They described how the cup of the Last Supper had been stolen from the Christian community in Jerusalem by a group of raiders in the 7th century. The Caliph, desperate for grain, appealed for help from the various Islamic rulers around the Mediterranean. A generous shipment of food arrived from the emir of a port city on the coast of Muslim Spain. In gratitude, the Egyptian Caliph sent the emir a magnificent gift. He sent him the sacred cup of the Christians. So, he gave the king the most precious thing he possessed, the chalice he had received from Cairo. King Ferdinand, a deeply pious man, received the relic. It was his daughter, the Infanta Dona Urraca, who then commissioned the magnificent golden setting to adorn and protect the simple agate bowls. A beautiful medieval chalice had a documented history that stretched all the way back to the early Christian community in Jerusalem. The historians were electrified. They rushed back to re-examine the chalice in light of this new evidence. The sound of their excited voices must have echoed in the quiet museum as they began piecing together this forgotten timeline. They subjected the agate bowls to scientific analysis. The result was a perfect match. The bowls were carved from stone between the years 200 BC and 100 AD, placing them in the exact time period of Jesus. Then they found the most compelling piece of evidence. The ancient Egyptian scrolls mentioned that a small sliver, a tiny chip, was missing from the rim of the cup, the result of a knock it had received centuries earlier. The historians examined the chalice of Dona Araka. There, on the rim, was a small, ancient chip, exactly as described in the scrolls. The publication of their book, Kings of the Grail, in 2014, caused an international sensation. It presented a radically different history for the Grail. It was a historical and political journey for the relic, tracked through verifiable documents. The debate it sparked was intense. The long-standing tradition of Valencia was now challenged by the newfound documentation of two chalices, two ancient agate cups from the time of Christ. Two incredible histories. One steeped in centuries of church tradition, the other rediscovered through the patient work of modern scholarship. But beyond these physical objects, who were the people tasked with protecting them through the ages? A sacred object, a relic, is only as safe as its guardians. The story of the Grail in Spain is not just the story of two chalices. It is the story of the keepers of the secret, the institutions and the individuals who preserved these treasures through 1,000 years of war, invasion, and upheaval. To understand their role, we must return to the mountains. We must return to the heart of the Pyrenees. Imagine a sheer wall of rock, a cliff face that seems to touch the sky, and there, built directly into an overhang in the living stone, is a monastery. It seems to have grown out of the mountain itself. This is the royal monastery of San Juan de la Pina, the monastery of St. John of the Cliff. It is a place of profound, deep silence, broken only by the wind or the sound of Gregorian chants echoing in a cold stone chapel. The air inside smells of beeswax and ancient wood from the monastery's library. For 328 years, from 1071 to 1399, this remarkable place was the documented home of the chalice that now rests in Valencia. This was no simple, isolated hermitage. San Juan de la Pina was the spiritual heart of the nascent kingdom of Aragon. It was the burial place of its early kings. It was a center of political power, a fortress of faith carved from rock. The monks who lived here, wearing their rough, woven habits, were not just men of prayer. They were scholars, diplomats, and the trusted keepers of their kingdom's holiest treasures. They understood the weight of their responsibility. And they were not alone in these mountains. The Knights Templar, those ever-present figures in the Grail legend, had a massive presence in the kingdom of Aragon. Just a short journey from the monastery stood the imposing castle of one of the most powerful Templar fortresses in all of Spain. The monks of San Juan and the Knights of were neighbors. They were two sides of the same coin, the spiritual and the military arms of a kingdom at war. It is easy to imagine them as partners in a sacred trust, sharing the duty of protecting the region's most important secrets. This reality on the ground in Spain gives flesh and bone to the literary idea of the Grail family. The German poet Wolfram von Eschenbach had written of a lineage of protectors, a secret fellowship that guarded the Grail. Here, in Aragon, such a fellowship truly existed. It was not a bloodline, but a succession of trust passed down through the generations, from kings to abbots, from monks to knights. They were the keepers. Their role was most crucial in times of crisis. The history of medieval Spain is the history of the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort by the Christian kingdoms to reclaim the peninsula from the Muslim caliphates. This was a land of shifting frontiers and constant warfare. The decision to move a sacred relic, like the transfer of the chalice from San Juan de la Peña to Valencia, was often a strategic one, made to keep it far from the front lines. These keepers did not just protect the object. Critically, they also preserved its story. They kept chronicles and inventories. They created the very documentation, the chain of custody, that allows historians today to trace the chalice's path. The same pattern of guardianship is visible in the chalice of Dona Urraca is kept in the Basilica of San Isidoro. Within that basilica is the royal pantheon, the burial chamber of the early kings and queens of the Sistine Chapel of Romanesque art. It is a place where royal power and sacred trust merge. The kings who were buried there were, in life, the ultimate protectors of the chalice, kept in the basilica above. Here, too, the responsibility was institutional. The Grail quest, which began in literature as the heroic individual adventure of a lone knight like Percival or Galahad, had evolved. In the real world, in the sanctuaries of Spain, the quest became a solemn, collective, and enduring responsibility. These keepers preserved the physical objects, but in doing so, they also preserved something far more powerful, the idea of the Grail itself. And as we reach the end of our historical quest, we must ask the final question: was the journey ever really about finding a cup? Our journey is coming to a quiet, contemplative end. The historical trail, which began in mist and myth, has led us to two tangible objects, resting peacefully in the cool darkness of Spanish cathedrals. The frantic shadow race is over. The battlefields have fallen silent. Let us imagine, for a moment, standing in one of those sanctuaries. Sunlight streams through a high stained glass window, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air. A single, resonant church bell tolls in the distance. Here, at the end of the road, we can finally reflect on the nature of the quest itself. The historical quest for the Holy Grail was never one single, unified movement. It was a complex tapestry, woven from disconnected threads. A Celtic myth, a French poem, a heretic's hope, a Templar secret, a monastic tradition, a king's treasure. We, looking back with the clarity of history, see a single narrative. But for those who lived it, it was an overlapping series of obsessions, each belonging to its own time and place. The true, enduring power of the Grail lies not in certainty, but in its profound ambiguity. What is it? Is it the simple agate cup in Valencia, the jeweled chalice? Was it the sacred stone of the German poets, or the lost treasure of the Cathars? Or is it, as some modern theories suggest, not an object at all, but a secret bloodline descended from Christ himself? The fact that it can be all of these things, and none of them definitively, is the secret to its survival. A solved mystery loses its power to inspire. An open question invites a lifetime of wonder. The various physical candidates for the Grail all serve the same vital purpose. For the faithful who stand before them, they are a focal point for devotion, a tangible link to a sacred moment 2,000 years ago. The search for the historical Grail, with its dusty archives and archaeological digs, often mirrors the more profound, personal search for spiritual meaning. It is an outward expression of an inner journey for enlightenment, for purpose, for a connection to something divine. The story has endured for 1,000 years because it is endlessly adaptable. It absorbed the magic of the Celts, the theology of Christianity, the chivalry of the medieval knights, and, in our own time, the intricate conspiracies of the modern age. No single object has ever been, or likely ever will be, proven with absolute, universal certainty. And that is a blessing. It means the quest can never truly end. The final mental image of our journey is not of a cup on a pedestal. It is of a long, unbroken line of figures stretching back through time. A Celtic bard chanting by a fire. A French poet scratching with a quill by candlelight. A Cathar parfait looking out from the walls of a Knight Templar standing vigil. A Spanish monk carefully copying a manuscript in a cold stone library, and a modern historian feeling a thrill of discovery in a dusty archive. All of them, in their own way, were questers, all chasing a glimmer of the same divine light. The true legacy of the Grail is not an artifact, but the art, the music, the literature, and the countless personal journeys it has inspired. Our search for the historical Holy Grail concludes here, not with a single definitive answer, but with a deeper appreciation for the journey itself. The true treasure was never the cup, but the faith, hope, and courage of those who pursued it. The story now passes to you as you drift into your own quiet quest for rest. For those of you still with me, thank you for joining this adventure. Your presence here makes our community special. As we transition to our epilogue, may your thoughts be peaceful and your sleep be deep. And so, our journey on the historical trail of the Grail comes to a close. The battlefields have fallen silent, the secret messages have been read, and the relics rest peacefully in their sanctuaries. But a story this powerful never truly ends. It simply sleeps for a time, waiting to be rediscovered. As we begin this final, quiet epilogue, the quest is reborn, not in the age of knights and castles, but in a world of steam and iron and gaslight. A world that found itself, once again, dreaming of a long-lost age of enchantment. The 19th century was an age of profound and often brutal change. The Industrial Revolution had filled the skies of Europe with smoke, and its cities with the relentless noise of machinery. For many, it felt as though a kind of magic had been stripped from the world, replaced by the cold, hard logic of the factory and the ledger book. It was in this environment that a powerful countercurrent began to flow, a deep and romantic nostalgia for a past that seemed more colorful, more heroic, and more spiritual. The medieval world, once dismissed as a dark age, was suddenly rediscovered, and the legends of King Arthur and the Holy Grail became a source of profound fascination. At the heart of this revival was a poet, Alfred, Lord Tennyson. He became the ultimate storyteller of his time, and his masterpiece, Idylls of the King, reimagined the whole Arthurian saga. Picture reading his powerful verses by the warm glow of gaslight. He framed the Grail quest as the spiritual high point of Camelot, with Sir Galahad as the purest knight on a noble mission. Tennyson's work took Victorian society by storm, shaping how a generation viewed chivalry, turning its violence into a beautiful, tragic dream of a kingdom striving for redemption. This dream was not confined to poetry. It exploded into color in the studios of a group of revolutionary English painters. They called themselves the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. They rejected the bland, formal art of their time and turned to the medieval world for inspiration. Their paintings are famous for their almost photographic detail, their deep, jewel-like colors, and their intense emotional sincerity. If you were to look upon a painting like Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Damsel of the Sanct Grail, you would see their vision. A solemn, beautiful woman with flowing red hair holds the chalice, her expression filled with a quiet, mystical power. The artists painted these scenes with an almost religious devotion, clothing their models in fabrics of velvet and lace, attempting to physically recreate their romanticized vision of the past. This romantic obsession soon spilled out of the library and the art studio and into the real world. A new breed of antiquarians and amateur archaeologists, armed with shovels and a deep belief in the old stories, began to excavate the ancient sites. They returned to Glastonbury, digging into the soft earth of the Abbey and the Tor, searching for the tomb of Arthur, for the staff of Joseph of Arimathea, for any physical proof that these beautiful legends were rooted in historical fact. At the same time, the great libraries of Europe were being explored. Scholars rediscovered and translated the original medieval texts of Détraz and Wolfram von Eschenbach, making these foundational stories accessible to a wide audience for the first time in centuries. The smell of old books and dusty archives being opened after a long silence was the scent of the legend reawakening. This rising tide of mysticism also fueled the growth of new spiritual movements. Secretive groups like the Theosophical Society and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn emerged, weaving the symbolism of the Grail into their own complex systems of belief. For them, the Grail was not just a Christian relic, but a universal symbol of hidden wisdom, of ancient gnosis, a vessel containing the secrets of the universe. And then came the music. In 1882, the German composer Richard Wagner premiered his final and most profound opera, Parsifal. It was a deeply personal interpretation of the Grail story, based on Wolfram von Eschenbach's epic poem. To sit in a darkened opera house and hear that music is an unforgettable experience. The sound of Wagner's soaring, dramatic score seems to fill not just the room, but your entire consciousness. He transformed the quest into a powerful psychological drama about sin, suffering, compassion, and redemption. His work presented the Grail legend as a timeless, universal myth of the human condition. Through all these different channels, the Victorian revival reshaped the meaning of the Grail. The focus shifted away from the specific, historical chalices in Spain. It shifted from the Grail as a physical object to be found, and towards the Grail as a powerful symbol. A symbol of spiritual purity, of national identity, and of a noble quest against a drab, materialistic world. It was this highly romanticized, beautiful, and ultimately simplified version of the legend that the 19th century would pass on as its inheritance. This romantic vision of a noble quest for a sacred object would soon be twisted into something far more sinister, as the legend fell into the hands of a dark, modern ideology. As the romantic dreams of the 19th century gave way to the harsh political realities of the 20th, the Holy Grail's journey took a dark and unsettling turn. The story, which had inspired poets and artists, was about to be co-opted by one of history's most monstrous regimes. Our story now moves to the Germany of the 1930s and to the strange occult obsessions of the Third Reich. At the center of this dark chapter is Heinrich Himmler, As the head of the SS, he was one of the most powerful and feared men in Nazi Germany. But he was also a man deeply fascinated by mysticism, ancient history, and the occult. Himmler was not a Christian. He despised the religion for its Jewish origins and its teachings of compassion. His grand ambition was to create a new religion for the Nazi elite, a pseudo-pagan faith based on a distorted vision of ancient Germanic traditions and the supposed purity of the Aryan race. He needed powerful symbols for this new religion, and the Holy Grail, with its legends of a secret order of knightly guardians, became one of his greatest obsessions. To house this new creed, Himmler acquired a castle, Wolfsburg, an imposing triangular fortress in central Germany. Under a perpetually gray sky, its stone walls seemed to absorb the light. This was to be the ceremonial home of the SS, a new Camelot for a new kind of knight. The cold, echoing halls were redesigned for the regime's purposes. In the North Tower, a great hall was created for the senior SS leaders to meet. Below it, a chilling, circular crypt was built, intended for rituals and as the final resting place for the order's most revered members. Himmler intended Wolfsburg to be nothing less than the center of the new world, and he believed that the Holy Grail, the ultimate symbol of power and legitimacy, rightfully belonged there. It was into this chilling world that a man named Otto Rahn walked. Rahn was a German writer, an amateur medievalist. He was a romantic, a dreamer, and he had developed a passionate, all-consuming obsession with the Cathars. He had spent years exploring the Pyrenees, climbing to the ruins convinced that the Cathar heretics had been the last true guardians of the Holy Grail. In 1933, he published his theories in a book called Crusade Against the Grail. It was a work of passionate but deeply flawed scholarship. It romanticized the Cathars and argued that their hidden treasure was Wolfram von Eschenbach's Grail. The book found its way into the hands of Heinrich Himmler. The SS leader was captivated. Rahn's theory was perfect for his purposes. It presented a version of the Grail story that was explicitly anti-Catholic and could be interpreted as a struggle by a pure Germanic-descended group, the Cathars, against a corrupt Roman institution. Rahn was invited to meet with Himmler. Soon after, he was pressured into joining the SS. His passion had become a prison. Himmler funded Rahn's research. He was sent on expeditions across Germany, France, and Iceland, searching for clues, for artifacts, for any shred of evidence that would support the Nazi vision of the Grail. The image is a disturbing one. SS officers in their stark black uniforms, poring over ancient maps, their quest not for spiritual enlightenment, but for an object they believed would prove their racial superiority. For Himmler, the Grail was not the cup of Christ. It was a pre-Christian Germanic relic, a symbol of pure Aryan blood, and the key to a lost ancient power. They sought to violently strip the legend of its Jewish and Christian heritage, to twist it into a tool of their own hateful ideology. But Otto Rahn was a scholar, not a Nazi ideologue. He grew disillusioned and tried to distance himself from the regime. He fell out of favor. In 1939, his SS career was over. A few months later, he was found frozen to death on a snow-covered mountainside in the Austrian Alps. His death was officially ruled a suicide or an accident, but the circumstances have remained forever mysterious. He was a man who flew too close to a very dark sun. The chilling silence of the mountains where he met his end is a somber testament to the dangers of a twisted quest. This dark chapter is a powerful reminder of the Grail's nature as a symbol. It is a vessel, and it can be filled with anything, hope and faith, but also hatred and delusion. It can be molded to fit any story, to serve any master, even the most malevolent. After the darkness of the war, the Grail would thankfully be reclaimed by storytellers, who would take the legend to its widest audience yet, turning the quest into a beloved part of our shared culture. As the world emerged from the shadow of war, the Grail legend was once again reborn. It returned to its rightful home, in the hands of poets, artists, and storytellers. This time, however, its audience would be global. The new medium of cinema would take this ancient myth and transform it into a cherished part of our modern popular culture. The quest would become a source of gentle nostalgia, of thrilling adventure, and of deep, heartfelt emotion. One of the most beloved and surprising interpretations arrived in 1975. The British comedy troupe Monty Python released their film, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It was a brilliant, loving, and utterly hilarious satire of the entire Arthurian legend. The film gently poked fun at the solemnity of the chivalric quest, with its brave knights, dangerous castles, and mystical challenges. By doing so, it made the story wonderfully accessible. The legend was no longer a dusty, serious tale from the distant past. It was a source of shared laughter, a story that everyone could enjoy and understand. A few years later, in 1981, another film presented a vision that was the complete opposite: John Berman's epic Excalibur. This was a return to the deep, mythological power of the story. It was a mystical, dreamlike, and intensely serious film that treated the legend with profound reverence. Its vision of the Grail quest was intertwined with the very health of the land and the king, a powerful echo of the ancient Celtic myths of the Fisher King. The film was a visual feast, a deeply immersive experience that captured the strange, otherworldly magic of the original tales. But perhaps the most influential modern depiction of the Grail arrived in 1989. Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This film would define the Grail for a new generation. The warm, nostalgic feeling of watching this classic adventure movie is a shared experience for millions. The sound of John Williams' iconic, soaring score instantly evokes a sense of wonder and excitement. The film masterfully framed the Grail quest as the ultimate archaeological adventure, a thrilling race against nefarious forces to uncover the world's greatest prize. The film's most powerful and enduring contribution was its depiction of the Grail itself. In the climactic scene, the hero is confronted with a choice: a room full of ornate, golden, bejeweled chalices, and one simple, humble, earthenware cup. The false Grail brings death. The true Grail, the simple cup of a carpenter, grants life. This was a profound creative choice. It rejected the jewel-encrusted fantasies of medieval romance and the dark ambitions of the Nazis, and brought the story full circle back to the humble, historical origins of the Christian faith. It suggested that true value lies in humility, not in power or wealth. The image of the simple wooden cup flickering in the darkness of a movie theater became the definitive image of the Holy Grail for the modern age. Then, in 2003, the legend was radically reinterpreted once more. The author Dan Brown published his novel, The Da Vinci Code. The book became a global phenomenon, a thriller that gripped millions of readers. The feeling of turning the pages of that novel, of being pulled deeper into its web of secrets, was captivating. Brown's central theory was a clever play on words. He argued that the Holy Grail was a misunderstanding of an older French term, sangreal, which could be broken down not as sangreal Holy Grail, but as sangreal royal blood. The Grail, he proposed, was not a cup at all, but the secret bloodline of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, a secret protected for centuries by the Knights Templar and other secret societies. While entirely a work of fiction, the novel's impact was enormous. It ignited a massive, worldwide surge of public interest in Grail lore, in the history of the Templars, and in the enduring mysteries of the past. The quiet hum of a television, late at night, broadcasting a documentary inspired by these theories, became a common sound. Through these stories and countless other books, video games, and television shows, the quest for the Holy Grail has become a familiar and beloved part of our global mythology. These modern tales often weave together all the different threads of the legend, the Knights of Arthur, the heretics of the secrets of the Templars, and the historical chalices of Spain to one grand, sprawling narrative. The Grail has become the ultimate prize, the perfect object to drive a story forward, motivating heroes and villains alike. From ancient myth to the silver screen, the Grail has proven to be a timeless story. But why, after all these centuries, does it still hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? As our long journey comes to its final, peaceful close, we are left with one last question. Why does this story endure? Why does the Holy Grail, an object that may or may not have ever existed, continue to exert such a powerful pull on our collective imagination? The answer, perhaps, is as simple and as profound as the Grail itself. It endures because it is an unsolved cipher. It is a story with a missing final page, and we are all invited to write our own ending. The Grail works as a perfect, timeless symbol precisely because it remains undefined. It is a vessel for meaning, capable of holding whatever the seeker needs it to hold. Its power is not in what it is, but in what it represents, and it can represent almost anything. For the person of deep religious faith, it is the most sacred of relics, a direct physical link to the divine, a tangible piece of a holy moment that changed the world. Its pursuit is an act of ultimate devotion. For the historian, it is a fascinating and intricate puzzle, a challenge of provenance, of sorting through forged documents and questionable timelines, of chasing faint textual clues through the labyrinth of the past. The quest is an intellectual one, a search for a verifiable truth. For the adventurer, both in fiction and in life, it is the ultimate treasure hunt, the greatest prize, a quest that promises not just wealth, but immortality and a place in legend. The journey is one of danger, excitement, and discovery. For the artist, the poet, the composer, it is a bottomless well of inspiration, a story rich with themes of heroism, sacrifice, failure, and grace. It is a source of infinite beauty and profound human drama. And for the spiritual, but not religious, for the modern seeker, the Grail represents a personal journey, a quest for wholeness, for enlightenment, for a deeper understanding of oneself. It is a symbol for the search for that which is missing in our own lives. The lack of a single, definitive, scientifically proven Grail is not a failure of the legend. It is the very source of its strength. It prevents the story from ever becoming a closed book, a simple museum exhibit with a label. There is always one more clue to follow, one more ancient text to decipher, one more theory to explore. The mystery is self-perpetuating. It invites us to continue the search. The core question of the earliest romances, whom does the Grail serve, remains as profound today as it was in the 12th century. It is a question that gently turns us away from the object itself and directs us back toward our own heart. It asks us to think about our own purpose, about our own capacity for compassion. The great lesson of the Grail stories, from the very beginning, has been that the journey is more important than the destination. The search itself is what heals the land and transforms the seeker. Ultimately, the Grail reflects a fundamental and deeply human desire, a desire to believe that there is something more to this world, something magical, something transcendent, something holy, hidden just beyond the veil of our ordinary, everyday lives. It is a path winding through a forest, disappearing into the mist. It is an invitation to believe and to wonder, and that invitation will never lose its power. The modern quest, like the ancient one, finds its end not in an object, but in a quiet understanding. The story is a timeless echo, and so the modern echoes of the Grail quest fade into a gentle quiet. The story for tonight is told. Thank you for staying with me through this epilogue. May the peace of this ancient mystery settle over you now and guide you toward a deep and restorative sleep. Rest well. The story of the Grail, as we have seen, is a singular and powerful obsession, a thread of gold that runs through 1,000 years of history. But it is not the only such thread. The quest for the Holy Grail was part of a much larger tapestry of faith, an age when physical objects were believed to hold a powerful connection to the divine. As we begin our final explorations tonight, let us wander for a time through the other quiet rooms in this great museum of belief, and look upon the other relics that inspired their own epic quests. The atmosphere here is calm and serene. There is no race to run, no mystery to solve. There is only time to wonder. One of the most powerful of these objects was a weapon, the Spear of Destiny, also known as the Holy Lance. This was said to be the very spear wielded by the Roman centurion Longinus to pierce the side of Christ on the cross. The legend that grew around it was potent. It was said that whoever possessed the spear held the destiny of the world in their hands, and so it became a relic not just of faith, but of immense political power. It passed through the hands of a succession of Europe's most powerful rulers. It was said to have been held by Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. For centuries, it was a centerpiece of the imperial regalia of the Habsburg dynasty in Vienna. To hold it was to claim a direct, physical link to the power that had humbled an empire. An even more central relic was the true cross, the physical wood of the cross used in the crucifixion. According to tradition, it was discovered in Jerusalem in the 4th century by Saint Helena, the mother of the Emperor Constantine. Its power was so immense that it was not kept whole. Instead, tiny splinters of the wood were carefully divided and distributed to churches and monasteries all across Christendom. The largest and most important pieces were kept in the holy cities of Jerusalem and Constantinople. To a medieval believer, to be in the presence of even the smallest fragment was an awesome experience. Imagine the faint golden glimmer of a single sliver of dark wood resting in an ornate, jewel-encrusted reliquary. In that tiny object, they saw the entirety of their faith. And then there were the cloths. The most famous, of course, is the Shroud of Turin, a long linen cloth that bears the faint, haunting, and inexplicable image of a crucified man. For the faithful, this is the very burial shroud of Jesus, the image seared onto the fabric at the moment of resurrection. Its journey through history is a winding and mysterious one, and to this day it remains one of the most studied and debated artifacts in the world. A sister relic is the Veil of Veronica. The story is a simple and beautiful one. As Jesus carried his cross on the road to Calvary, a woman named Veronica, moved by compassion, stepped from the crowd and used her veil to wipe the sweat and blood from his brow. As a reward for her kindness, his image was miraculously imprinted upon the fabric. Relics were the ultimate prize for a medieval king. In the 13th century, the pious King Louis IX of France acquired the single most revered relic of the Passion, the crown of thorns. He purchased it at enormous expense from the Byzantine emperor, and to house this treasure, he built a chapel in the heart of Paris. But it was no ordinary chapel. He built Sainte-Chapelle, a building that is less a structure of stone and more a container made of light. To stand inside it is to be bathed in the deep blues and reds of the most stunning stained glass in the world. The light itself feels holy. The entire building was designed to be a giant, magnificent reliquary for its sacred treasure. These quests and collections were not limited to the life of Christ. The bones of the apostles and saints were also profoundly important. The cool, silent atmosphere of a crypt beneath a great basilica, like St. Peter's in Rome, is a place of deep reverence, for it is believed to be the final resting place of the first apostle himself. For centuries, the relics of saints drove the great currents of civilization. The medieval practice of pilgrimage was a journey of faith, often undertaken at great risk and over thousands of miles, to visit these holy sites. These journeys connected distant parts of the world and created entire economies along their routes. The worn texture of stone steps on a pilgrim's path, smoothed by the feet of millions, tells a story of this deep and powerful devotion. Many of these relics were held for centuries in the magnificent city of Constantinople. But the tragic events of the Fourth Crusade in 1204 saw the city sacked by Western knights, and its vast treasury of holy objects was scattered across Europe, enriching the cathedrals of Venice, Paris, and Rome. Each relic, whether its story is true or not, whether its origin is ancient or medieval, served a purpose. Like the Grail, each inspired its own unique blend of faith, politics, and adventure. These holy objects were often tied to another great legend of the Middle Ages, that of a noble king and his fellowship of knights. As our thoughts drift away from the holy relics of Christendom, let us turn our gaze to the land where the Grail quest first took root in the imagination, to the misty green Isle of Britain and the enduring search for its greatest hero, King Arthur. The question has been asked for centuries. Was he real? Was there a historical king, a real Camelot, a tangible round table? The search for these answers is a quiet and gentle one, a journey into a past where history and myth are almost impossible to untangle. The story begins not in a grand chivalric court, but in the chaos and violence of the Dark Ages. After the Roman legions abandoned Britain in the 5th century, the island was plunged into a long period of warfare. Anglo-Saxon invaders from the continent pressed ever westward, and the native Romano-British people fought a desperate battle for survival. It is from this historical reality that the figure of Arthur likely emerged. He was probably not a king in the sense we understand it today. The earliest Welsh sources, like the Historia Brittonum, written centuries after the fact, describe him as a dux bellorum, a commander of battles, a successful and charismatic warlord who led a band of elite mounted warriors, comitatus, and won a series of 12 great victories against the Saxons, culminating in the decisive Battle of Mount Badon. This was the small, historical seed. It was a writer in the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth, who took this obscure warrior and transformed him. In his wildly popular book, History of the Kings of Britain, Geoffrey gave Arthur a crown, a court, a magical sword, and a kingdom that stretched across Europe. He created the legend as we know it. And once the legend was created, people began to search for its physical traces in the landscape. The journey often begins in Cornwall at Tintagel Castle. Here, the ruins of a medieval castle cling dramatically to a wind-swept headland. The sound of the sea crashing against the cliffs far below is a constant, powerful presence. The air smells of salt and damp earth. Geoffrey of Monmouth claimed this was the place of Arthur's magical conception and birth. And while the ruins we see today are from a later period, recent archaeology has uncovered something remarkable here. Evidence of a high-status, wealthy settlement from the Dark Ages, the very time the historical Arthur would have lived. A place where a powerful leader could have held court. From his birth, the search moves to his legendary court, Camelot. The most likely candidate for this famous stronghold is Cadbury Castle in Somerset. This is not a castle of stone, but a vast, ancient Iron Age hill fort. As you stand on its high, sweeping green earthworks, you can feel the wind on your face and see the whole of the surrounding landscape spread out before you. Archaeologists have shown that this fort was massively refortified in the 6th century, at exactly the right time, by a leader with immense resources. For many, this is the closest we will ever come to a real Camelot. And what of the Round Table? The famous symbol of the equality of Arthur's knights. The most famous tangible object associated with the legend hangs on the wall in the Great Hall of Winchester Castle. It is a massive, circular tabletop, 18 feet across, painted with the names of Arthur's knights. It is an imposing and impressive sight, but science has revealed its true age. It was not made in the 6th century, but in the 13th. It was created for King Edward I, a great admirer of the Arthurian legends, likely for a royal tournament, a piece of magnificent medieval theater. It is not Arthur's table, but it is a powerful testament to how deeply the legend was beloved, even by real kings. The historical truth of Arthur remains elusive, a ghost in the pages of chronicles written long after he was gone. The reality was likely simpler, harder, and far more brutal than the shining legends of chivalry. But the search for him is a gentle and poetic one. It is a quiet reminder of how a small historical truth, a single successful warlord fighting in the twilight of Roman Britain, can blossom over the centuries into a world-spanning legend of nobility, tragedy, and hope. The settings for these quests, both real and imagined, were as important as the stories themselves, defined by their unique and memorable architecture. Let us now take a peaceful architectural tour. The great quests of the Middle Ages unfolded within and between buildings of stone. These structures, the monasteries, the cathedrals, the castles, were the silent witnesses to our story. They were built to last, and their very designs tell us a story of the people who made them and the world they inhabited. Their styles evolved, reflecting changes in faith, in technology, and in the human desire to reach for the heavens. Our tour begins in the world of the early keepers of the Grail, in the age of Romanesque architecture. From the 10th to the 12th centuries, this was the dominant style. Think of the Basilica of San Isidoro. In Romanesque buildings are solid, grounded, and immensely powerful. They are defined by their incredibly thick walls, their heavy, round arches, and their relatively small windows. The feeling inside is one of a fortress, a safe haven in a dangerous world. To stand in a Romanesque nave is to feel enclosed and protected. The sound of your own footsteps creates a deep, resonant echo in the vast, stony silence. It is the architecture of a deep and solid faith. Then, in the middle of the 12th century, a revolution happened. A new style was born in France, a style we call Gothic. The builders learned to use pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and most importantly, flying buttresses to support the weight of the roof. This was a breathtaking innovation. Suddenly, the thick walls were no longer needed. They could be made thinner, and they could be opened up. And into these openings, the builders placed vast windows of stained glass. Think of Chartres Cathedral. To step inside a Gothic cathedral is to step into a different world. The goal is no longer to feel grounded, but to soar. You look up, and the vaulted ceiling seems impossibly high, a stone canopy dissolving into the heavens. The interior is flooded with colored light, and you can see the patterns from the stained glass moving slowly and silently across the stone floor. It is easy to see this transition from the dark, heavy Romanesque to the light-filled, soaring Gothic as a metaphor for the quest itself, journey from the darkness of the world towards the light of spiritual enlightenment. But not all the architecture of the quest was built for peace. The Cathar castles of the Languedoc, were starkly different. They were military structures built for survival. Known as castra, they were often perched on inaccessible mountain peaks, their walls conforming to the natural contours of the rock. They were pragmatic, defensive, and rugged. You can feel the rough, weathered texture of a castle rampart, a stone shield against a hostile world. The Crusader castles in the Holy Land, the mighty cracks, were even more formidable, combining European and Byzantine designs to create concentric rings of walls and massive towers. Even the monastic orders had their own distinct styles. The Knights Templar favored an early, austere version of the Gothic style, simple and functional, without excessive decoration, a reflection of their discipline and their dual role as monks and soldiers. And some monasteries, like San Juan de la Pina, seem to defy categories altogether. They are examples of organic architecture, built directly into the living rock of a cliff face, a true fusion of human endeavor and the natural world. Each of these buildings tells a story of faith that sought to build a gateway to heaven, of fear that sought to build an impenetrable defense, of humility that sought to build a quiet space for contemplation. For nearly 1,000 years, these silent stone witnesses have endured, holding the echoes of the past within their walls. Our journey through time and place has been long. Let us end where it all began, in the mists of that ancient, sacred isle. The day is ending now. The story is almost told. Let us take one final, peaceful walk together. There is no need for historical facts anymore. There is only the here and now. In this ancient and sacred landscape, let our journey end where the legend of the Grail first took root in British soil. Let us take a final walk through Avalon, through Glastonbury. We begin at the foot of the Tor. The gentle green slope rises before us into the evening sky. We feel the cool grass beneath our feet. The path is soft, and we begin to climb. The distinctive terraces that circle the hill wind around us, a silent, ancient mystery, a ceremonial labyrinth, perhaps, or the ghost of an old field system. As we ascend, the air changes. It grows cooler, clearer. The sounds of the world below begin to fade, replaced by the soft whisper of the wind. We reach the summit. Before us stands the solitary tower of St. Michael, a final, defiant remnant of a medieval church, its body long since shaken to the ground by an ancient earthquake. From up here, we can see for miles in every direction. The Somerset levels, a patchwork of green fields and waterways, stretch out to the horizon. We can see how this place was once an island, rising from a sea of water and marsh. And as we watch, the evening mist begins to gather in the low-lying fields, a soft, white blanket slowly covering the world. Now we descend. The path leads us down from the wind of the Tor and into the deep peace of the Chalice Well Gardens. We have left the wide open sky and entered a sheltered, quiet world. The first thing we notice is the sound, the gentle, constant, and living sound of water flowing from the ancient spring, as it has for thousands of years. It is a sound of endless peace. The air here smells of blooming flowers and of the rich, damp earth. We see the wellhead cover with its interlocking circles, a symbol of the meeting of worlds. We simply stand and listen to the water. Finally, our path takes us into the quiet ruins of Glastonbury Abbey. The sun has set now, and the great, broken arches of the church stand like dark skeletons against the deep purple of the twilight sky. The silence here is profound and enveloping. This was once one of the most powerful places in all of England, a center of wealth and learning. Now it is a place of memory and of peace. We wander through the soft grass until we find a simple, rectangular sign laid flat upon the ground. We have seen it before in our story, but now we are here. It marks the spot where the monks of 1191, a final resting place. Here, in the quiet heart of Avalon, history and myth lay down together, and our story dissolves into dream. The echoes of the quest have faded, leaving only the gentle sounds of this ancient place. Thank you for joining the Sleeping Scribe on this journey. Your support for the channel allows us to continue exploring these wonderful stories of the past. If you've enjoyed our time together, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing our channel with a fellow history lover. But for now, all that is left to do is rest. Let the mists of history cradle you. Let the silence deepen, and let your sleep be peaceful and complete.